we start. Yes, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to those who are watching us from Canada and from other parts of the world. I am Agnes Doka, Director of Communications for Mission Canada. Thank you for joining us today for this press conference introducing Mission Canada 2019 preliminary statement of findings on the second round of Ukraine's presidential election. I would like to welcome our esteemed guests and the representatives of the media. The mission observed the entire electoral process, including the election period between the two rounds of the presidential elections in Ukraine. Mission Canada 2019 is an impartial, bilateral and neutral election observation mission composed of 160 short and long-term observers. This number includes a core team of experts and analysts who are based in Kiev. The press conference, this one, is streaming live at the webpage of uacrisis.org in English and in Ukrainian, and is being translated simultaneously from English to Ukrainian. So please take your headphones. This is for the Ukrainian media. The headphones are available behind the cameras, and make sure you get the translation. We are also issuing a press release included in your press kits in English and in Ukrainian, as well as a preliminary report in English, Ukrainian, and in French. At this press conference, there will be a presentation of our report, a question and answer session, and after the press conference, the head of mission and the deputy head of mission will be available for individual interviews and will discuss with you any information, any additional information you might need. I would like to introduce the head of mission, the Honorable Lloyd Axworthy, who is a prominent Canadian politician, statesman, and academic. Here with us today, the Deputy Head of Mission, Olya Odynska-Grod, who has participated in several electoral observation missions to Ukraine in different management capacities. So with this, I would like to ask the Honorable Lloyd Axworthy to present the findings, the key findings of Mission Canada 2019 in the second round of the elections.
Thank you very much, Agnes, and welcome to everybody. We welcome you here for this presentation of the combined work of the mission, which Agnes said involved a large number of observers throughout the country, very specialized analysts and experts who could look at specific areas of interest and concern, and a number of direct consultations and meetings with civil societies, with government officials. So we think we have a very broad-based sort of weaving of opinions that we can bring to bear on this assessment that we're providing. And I think it's important to start with maybe the most important, and that is that the Ukrainian population have confirmed their commitment to democratic principles and have chosen their new president in a democratic election. I'd like to offer my congratulations to the President-elect, Mr. Zelensky, on the very strong mandate that was given to him by the people, and thanks to President Poroshenko for his service to Ukraine and for his commitment to a very orderly and civil transfer of power that he has expressed now to the media. The 2019 presidential election has met the international standards for democratic elections. The results reflect the will of the Ukrainian people, which is all the more remarkable given that the election took place in the context of an ongoing foreign aggression by Russia. Mission Canada would like to congratulate the Central Election Commission, as well as the District electoral commissions and precinct groups. I would say personally our travels about on election day were met with courtesy and hospitality and interest. It was just part of the sense of how strong the commitment was to making Ukraine stronger again and the welcoming of third-party observers. And I'd also further like to recognize the outstanding commitment of over 500,000 citizens who volunteered and worked in the preparations for the election, and a special vote of recognition and thanks to the men and women who are on the front and through their efforts are fighting to defend these very democratic rights that was so aptly exercised yesterday. Our assessment is that no major incidents of election-related violence or disruption were reported. The overall coordination of security matters between branches of law enforcement and security services were positively observed by Mission Canada between the two rounds of the election. In terms of cybersecurity, Russian influence continues to be present before the second round of elections. And I think we have to recognize the presence of over 80 Russian TV radio outlets has become a permanent source of anti-Ukrainian propaganda. Additionally, numerous unmarked websites, foreign distribution networks have published political agitation and advertising, including black PR. Such websites distributed fake or misleading information, which unfortunately found its way out too often to national and international outlets. Several civil society groups that we met with expressed to Mission Canada concerns that one of the candidates was generally unwilling to give interviews to the media or to engage with the national public broadcaster. Concerns were raised over apparent disregard of full media access so that full disclosure of proposed policies and positions could be transmitted. We also recognize the high concentration of media ownership by a few interests continue to shape the information space and voters' access to information. This represents a setback, and it's part of a trend line that virtually all democracies are now facing, and we hope that the new government will be able to provide a very clear set of new rules and enforcements to counteract that issue. We also recognize how important debates are to the democratic process, and the people of Ukraine should be able to have the opportunity to familiarize themselves with candidates' respective visions or platforms. In the interest of people, future elections that we will all be looking at come October, and we hope that that expectation will be met. The lack of a regulation concerning online media and the use of online resources helps to create, promote, and advertise illegal political content. So we also like to say that there was an increase in the number of women involved in the administration of the election, but Mission Canada notes that the issue of gender equality remained absent from the two candidates' campaigns and public statements. Regarding the voters' participation, the Mission has noted the short time frame between the first and second rounds of voting that has led to challenges for voter registration and re-registration, especially that amongst the internally displaced persons and Ukrainian citizens residing in the occupied Crimea and occupied parts of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. The mission noted that crossing from the temporarily occupied territories to vote in the election was problematic for many voters. Obstructions were put in their place. More efforts must be aimed at facilitating the participation of citizens living in the temporarily occupied territories and should be undertaken by authorities, and also strong representations must be made to Russia and its proxies to remove any obstructions. We note that altogether over 300,000 people changed their voting addresses temporarily. This is slightly higher than in the first round, but changing the voting address twice has still proved problematic for many voters and resulted in long queues and waiting hours. Future elections need to be governed by clear, enforceable media guidelines and more transparent and comprehensive political financing rules. But it still does come down to one central observation, and that was the incredible will and spirit of the Ukrainian people to make this election work. I spoke this morning to one of our observers on a village close to the compact line, in which the only experience or event of a poll not opening in time was taken note of by the local officials. They were not going to be part of that 0.00% participation. So local mayors and councils got together, reset the whole system, and by 3 o'clock, the poll was open, and they had a first-time voter there to greet their newfound right. To me, that represents in a very strong way incredible will and spirit that we have observed during this election. I'd now like to turn over the mic to the Deputy Head of Mission, who has, I think, some interesting statistics and observations that come directly from a system that we established to put a statistical assessment of how the election worked. Olya?
Thank you. The LTOs, of which we had 37, LTO being long-term observers, and 106 short-term observers, in the second round visited 2,366 polling stations in all the oblasts of Ukraine where voting took place. That is a very large number and exceeds our efforts in the first round. As well, they visited 26% of those polls they visited were in the rural communities, and 74% were in the urban communities. In terms of the opening of the precinct stations, it was noted that 91% opened on time. And these, of course, are of the ones they observed, not all over Ukraine, but of the 2,366. And in terms of closing, 97.1% closed on time. Mission Canada observers were granted full cooperation in 99.7% of the polling stations, and in 98.6% of the polling stations they visited, they had a clear view of the counting procedures. Observers rated the overall conduct of these processes as good or very good. Opening, 97%. Voting, 98.5%. Counting, 97.1%. 21% of the district electoral offices observed were overcrowded during the transfer of the precinct results. Those are the findings, several of the key findings. There are many more that will be shared at a later date, but that's the bullet points for now. Thank you.
If I could make a small editorial comment. In my home country of Canada, I have been through personally 9 elections. If we had met those kinds of statistical standards, it would have been probably one of the world's second miracles. So by comparison, this is a very well-managed election. Any questions, please?
One second.
Андрій Миль, Інститут лібералізму.
Andrei Mill, Institute of Liberalism.
You done the great job, but I have one small question. What is your personal expression of the second round and the election period? You consider only Russia influence or fight between two candidates? You didn't understand?
Well, on the one hand, having two candidates simplified things, and I think it certainly helped to, as they say, focus and consolidate the choices of voters. In the experience that we had with our observers reporting in, as well as personal experiences going to visit several of the precincts, I found that there was a remarkable sort of sense of cooperation between them. I didn't see a large amount of animosities or differences or divisions. I think there really was, especially at that basic polling level, a sense of we're in this together to build a stronger Ukraine and a better democracy. And I'm sure there were examples where maybe you didn't totally like your neighbor, but in the conversations that we had and the discussions we had, I really did notice a very broad base of agreement of the importance of the election and the importance of having a good election. And I take away a great admiration for the people and those who were managing the election along that line.
Yes, so we are welcoming more questions. Please state your name and the media you're representing.
Hi there, I'm Michael Butserkio. I've been here documenting mostly for CNN Opinion. I think it's fair to say that there's been no election like this, maybe perhaps in the world, given the characters involved. And a lot of the people I've talked to and a lot of other journalists have gotten the impression from people that they've had a tough time kind of making the difference between the Zelensky on the screen and the Zelensky in person, suggesting that they might have been duped in a way or, you know, just had a tough time telling the difference between the two characters. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on it. I know it's something that's difficult to document or observe, but it's probably on a lot of people's minds.
Well, your question gives me an opportunity to relate what I thought was one of the most unique, fascinating election exercise I've ever seen. I was one of those, along with some of our colleagues in the mission, at the debate in the stadium last Friday night. I've never quite seen a venue where 30 or 40,000 people were there to cheer on their champions with all the flags. I mean, it reminded me of maybe watching a World Summit athletic event. But again, I noticed that, you know, the candidates themselves went at it in a very tough way, that in the crowd themselves, there was the normal cheering and back and forth that you find in that event, but there was no disruption, there was no violence, there was no fights. I mean, there was no hooligans from Great Britain to be found. Oh, I eliminate that last comment. But you know, I thought back to, again, my own experience. I was a member of Parliament for 27 years, and I've never quite seen the exchange of those kinds of views in that kind of venue. So it may be that Ukraine has set a new standard for participation in elections by putting to work all those very expensive stadia that we have around the world to let people come and really be directly participant in what's going on. That to me was a demonstration, and I do think that the Ukraine is on the front line in several areas. Clearly, in our discussions, their efforts in the intelligence services and police services to be preventative when it comes to interference from others, I think has so far worked very well. I mean, they've been able, there's been small incidents, some reports, but nothing that would in any way disrupt the election itself. And so I think there's lessons to be learned there, and I think it will be of interest to a lot of democratic governments about how Ukraine is managing that particular, because it's on the front line, probably has more experience with interference than almost anybody in the world, and I think we have a lot to learn.
Quick follow-up, if I may. If I'm not mistaken, about 410,000 people registered at overseas polling stations. I'm wondering if you had the ability to monitor any of those processes in Ottawa or Washington or Canberra.
No, we through our operation, we were not involved in that. I do believe that some of the other missions, I think particularly the Canadian Ukrainian Congress, was involved in those kind of, whether it's you call it diaspora or expat elections. But I can't comment that we were focused on what happened here in Ukraine itself.
And I've just come back from the Zelensky headquarters briefing, and they said that a lot of the black PR, if I understood the Russian correctly on that answer they gave, came from overseas. I don't know if they were referring to diaspora sources, but they did say that they did detect quite a bit of so-called black PR on social media coming from outside Ukraine. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I want to go back to our statement. I think we recognize as well that those particular agencies are out to disrupt or out to undermine. And I think it's important that not only Ukraine itself, which is rapidly developing some effective tools, it also has to be tools that are shared with other democratic governments. This is something that we're all into. And I think that if we allow that kind of underlying corruption to take place in public information and public access to positions, then it really does undermine your democracy. So for someone, again, who's been involved in political life for 3 decades, I came away much more conscious and much more concerned, but also recognizing that many of the steps that have been taken, even from the first round of elections when we began the observation to now, it has become quite sophisticated, and I think we need to probably have a very high level of cooperation in making sure that that continues.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Шановні гості, якщо у вас є запитання українською, у нас в залі є перекладач.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions, any questions, we have simultaneous interpretation here, so you can avail yourself of this option.
Conference. Thank you very much for your participation and your interest in our preliminary findings. A final report will be available about 2 months from now. The copies of the preliminary statement that we issued now are available on your way out in English and in Ukrainian, so please pick up a copy. And the head of mission and the deputy head of mission will remain in this room and available for individual interviews. Thank you so much.
Okay.